It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, hello, this is Phil Ferguson, and you are, of course, listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I have so much going on. It's absolute great fun, but I'm going to keep the intro a little short because of the amazing content, secondo me, according to me, the amazing content that's going to follow in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. We do have later in the show an interview with Jared Huffman. He is a United States representative representing California's 2nd District, the north of California along the coastline. Absolutely delightful conversation we had, and you're going to love it. He is also one of the founding members of what's called the Freethought Caucus. And the Freethought Caucus promotes secular worldview. It promotes a scientific, rationally based worldview and fights for the freedoms and protection and the liberty and the rights of secularists, atheists, humanists, even religious people that might be put out by a dominant religion in this culture. And we talk about the courts, we talk about bills, we talk about healthcare insurance fraud, we talk about a lot of stuff. And I cannot thank him enough, Jared Huffman, Representative Jared Huffman, for coming on the show and talking to me and maybe giving you a little bit of insight into how things are or how bad things are. The other topic, I meant it to be a little quickie. I almost called it a mini Investing Skeptically segment, but it ran more than 20 minutes. I hope you enjoy that and you're not bored out of your mind. But the basic idea in that is the weird reality that we are in now where bond yields have jumped a lot, but the bond values have fallen a lot. How does that affect your portfolio? Amazingly, it might be to your advantage. So check that out and learn a little bit more about how bonds, bond and index funds, and the cushion and yields and all that shit works, at least in my head. And hopefully that helps. If I've made it more confusing, let me know. If I've explained something, let me know. If you have follow-up questions or something you think that I really missed out on that I should cover in another episode, or if you have a new show idea, you can always send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it when it's recently loaded up, I'm at CSICon. Yes, I recorded the segments a little bit early because I don't want to do work when I'm at the conference, or at least not much work. So I'm going to be at the CSI conference from the Center for Inquiry in Las Vegas. If you're hearing this before you get to Las Vegas, which you probably won't. Never mind. If you're at Las Vegas, come up and say hi. I'm going to be at Las Vegas, and then after that, we're going to go to San Antonio for the Freedom from Religion annual conference. Excellent couple of weeks coming up, and then it's back to Chicago, and then back to Florida, and then I think a good chunk of the holidays we will be back in Chicago for the family that's here. But then in January, I'm out of here. I'm out of Chicago. I'm going to be in Florida for the majority of the time, probably for 3 or 4 months in a row. And I will actually, in January, I've got to look at the date. It's something like the 13th or 15th. I will be giving a presentation to the Central Florida Freethought Committee Conference. I gotta memorize that. I gotta learn that name. I'm so sorry, because that's going to be my local crew now in the Orlando, Central Florida area. So maybe you can come see me give a presentation there in January. And of course, I'll have more details on that as time goes along. So I'm babbling. I'm just going to take a break. You have a minute of something different, and we'll go into the Investing Skeptically segment. And then right after that, US Representative Jared Huffman will join us.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
How you can justify wanting to take something away from people from 95 that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions. This Investing Skeptically segment is going to be about the yield or yields versus the cushion and how long your money can last in a down stock market. It's an important part of the Polaris plan. If you are familiar with the Polaris plan, great. I'm going to assume that you are. If you're not, you may have to go back a couple of months and listen to the 6-part series that I did back in, July, August of 22. So not too far back, because this is now October of 22. But I wanted to go over one of the fundamental ideas again and give you an update, is that for me, it's not a percentage of bonds that you should have in your portfolio at retirement or close to retirement. It's about how long your portfolio in total can cover your monthly and annual expenses before you're at risk of carving into the meat instead of the fat of the portfolio. Hopefully that makes sense. So if I profoundly oversimplify it, let's just say you had one and only one investment and it paid out 3% per year, guaranteed, which is no, those things don't really exist, but we're just pretending here for a moment. It paid out 3% guaranteed, and you had $1 million. It paid you $30,000 in dividends. You could take out $30,000 a year from those dividends and spend it and still have your $1 million. That's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. So as long as you eat slowly, that 3% will cover you every year in perpetuity. Not an ideal situation, because the 3%, the 30,000 would become relatively smaller over time as inflation rises prices. So we don't want an exact match, but I'm just giving you a theoretical thing. For me, the goal in retirement is to have a large enough portfolio that it will return as much as you spend forever and allow you to have a little bit of spending increases over time. The primary way to do that is with stocks, stock market growth. Generally speaking, historically speaking, the vast majority of stock market growth or the increase in value of the stocks or the index funds that you own is through appreciation. We are now at a point where we're not getting appreciation. We're getting declining values, depreciation in the assets, and it's kind of painful. Just keep in mind that if you look back over the last 10 years, let's see here, if I got this handy, not the main point of my talk. For the last 10 years, the average return of the U.S. stock market, including this 20% or more drop year to date in 2022, that return is still over 11% per year, including this correction. So that's fantastic. And if you're young, that's where you want to be. If you're far from retirement, that's where you want to be. When you get closer to retirement, you want to be less in that environment and more into the cushion. The cushion can return and go up and down in value depending on the specific types of bonds or bond index funds that you're using, but they also pay out yields. And so what I calculate, and historically, the range that I want the cushion to last was 10 to 12 years. And as the market did really well, we changed to 11 to 13, then 12 to 14, and then maybe even considering 15. So the first thing, by the way, I'm going to go back to the 12 to 14. You no longer need to have 15 years, and I'm going to get into some of the reasons why that might be. Another thing is for the last several years, and it has been a source of concern for some listeners and even some clients, the bond yields were horrifically low. I was putting the vast majority of cushion money into short-term bonds, Ginnie Mae bonds, and then just a little bit, maybe 5 to 7% each in international bonds, emerging market bonds, and high yield, which is generally North American, aka junk bonds. And the reason the vast majority of the money was in the really safe and conservative and short-term bonds is the cushion is there to protect you in case the market goes down. That's the primary goal. So we don't want our bonds to be a big part of the volatility of our portfolio. That's the safe stuff. I call it the cushion because you can lay your head on it at night and go to sleep and not worry. Well, a weird thing has happened in the last 12 months. Let's see here. I think I've got this data in front of me. The total bond portfolio. One moment. This is as of September 30th. For regular listeners, I generally only update these numbers once a quarter, and I do a big annual review, of course, annual review once a year. But looking at the data from September 30th of 2022, the total bond market index as measured by the Vanguard Bond Fund, VBTLX, the total return, the past performance of the last 12 months ending September 30th for that fund is minus 14.66. For convenience, I'm going to say minus 15%. Pretty fucking brutal. For bonds, that's where you think you were going to be safe. You have that as your cushion. This is one of the reasons I don't recommend the total bond index fund, because I was being much more conservative. The yields that people were getting from the portfolio that I was recommending, and let's see if I have this. I think I have it open. Where is it? From last year. Yes, here it is. The yield that you could be getting from the portfolio I was recommending a year ago was about 1.1%. Pretty slim. And I would have people call me and say, "Hey Phil, I'm going to buy a car next year and I've got the money today. I've got the 40,000 set up. Where should I invest 40,000 for 1 year to make the most money?" And often my answer would be like, put it in the bank, make nothing, get a CD that pays 0.5%. I don't know. There weren't, in my opinion, good options. Also, a year ago, you could have put it into the Vanguard long-term corporate bond fund that made 3%, not 0.5% or 0.8% that you could get in short term. You could make 3%. And I strongly suggested on my show, do not do that. Take the conservative route. We are at all-time historic lows for bonds. And if the interest rates go up, they couldn't really go down much further unless we go to negative interest rates. And I don't think the U.S. government had the stomach for that. If interest rates go up, bond values go down. Who wants to buy from you a 1% bond and I can go out on the street and get a 4% bond? I'm not interested in your bond. If your bond is only a 1-year bond, you might lose 3 or 4%. if it's a 20-year bond, it might lose 3% per year for 20 years, which can become very big losses, which is where we are now. We are where bonds have had very big losses. And like I said, the Vanguard Long-Term Corporate Bond Fund down 29%. The Long-Term Government Bond Fund down 27%. If you had a large portion of your money in investments like this, the long-term bonds, thinking that they were safe and they were going to protect you when the market went down, you just got fucked. And it wasn't pretty. And even on the very short-term bond funds, the losses are significantly larger than I had anticipated. To be fair, I'm going to own that. I thought maybe these really short-term bonds might lose 2, 3, 4, 5%. Would not have surprised me that much. The current losses in the short-term government fund is 7.26, and the short-term corporate fund is minus 7.98, minus 8. So the really conservative stuff did much better than minus 15, but I did have a little bit in things that might do better that didn't, particularly the emerging market bonds. International bonds minus 13, and the junk bonds minus 13 as well. But the overall blend that I was recommending a year ago, and that I reaffirmed in the summer of 2022 here more recently, had a total return of minus 10.34. I'm going to call it minus 10.5. We got a couple ways to look at this. One, minus 10.5 sucks. Sucks hard. That's awful. However, that is so much better than minus 15, an improvement of almost 4.5%. You missed out on, you dodged 4.5% additional loss in your portfolio if you were using the Polaris plan. Now, one could argue that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, you may be underperformed by not having the higher yields, and that would be true. One of my overriding goals is to not necessarily get the most money in any given year, but to get reasonably close to solid quality performance year after year after year with, if possible, market-beating returns, and again, if possible, slightly less volatility. And I was taking the path of less volatility, less risk with bonds, being very conservative. And in calendar year 2022 so far, we have been richly rewarded with a minus 10.5%. It could have been worse. It could have been minus 15. So I'm very happy with that. It doesn't always break in my favor. Hopefully, more often than not. And this is one of those times. But I do also want to acknowledge that I had not anticipated this big of a drop. I had not anticipated the Fed moving as quickly as they had after so many years of inaction, where I, again, am on record saying they should have been raising interest rates years ago. But here's where we are. Now, the cushion and the dividends from the investments and the stock part, which is not the cushion, and the dividends there, all can stack up and help you collect money every year when you're in retirement. And so a year ago, if you had $1 million portfolio and the average yield on all of your stocks and bonds was about 1.2%, and let's see, is that the number I used? Yeah, 1.2%, your $1 million portfolio could have returned in a given year about $12,000. So the weird thing that we have now, that let's just say that total $1 million portfolio that you had a year ago, because the stock market is down, the bonds are down, international, domestic, everything's down. Let's say you lost 20%. I'm not saying you did. We're just having a discussion, looking at some curiosity, some interesting things that have happened. Yields on bonds yields on stocks are up compared to a year ago as a percentage of the price of the stocks. We've talked about this in the past, where often almost always yields are stated by companies in dollars and pennies per share. So if the price of the stock goes down, until they change or declare a new lower rate, which they are very hesitant to do, effectively the yields on stocks go up. The dollar amount may not go up, but the yield as a percentage goes up. Bonds, on the other hand, have jumped from around 1% to around, I think I said this already, around 4%. We're going to call that 4%. So your total portfolio went from 1 million to possibly 800,000. However, the blended rate on all of the yields, stocks are up, domestic stocks, international stocks are up, but the bonds are way up. And so now, instead of getting 1,000 or 12,000 or maybe 14,000 in dividends a year ago, you're now getting about $23,000 in dividends a year because of the change in interest rates, because of the change of yield. And in a funny way, that makes it a little bit easier for you to make your monthly payments out of dividends and not sell the bonds. But I do want to focus on bonds for just a moment here. If you had 400,000 out of your million in bonds a year ago, and I'm not saying that that's what you should have had. Again, theoretical discussion. None of this is personalized investment advice meant for you specifically. We're reviewing ideas, hopefully to help you have a more nuanced understanding of how a lot of this complicated shit works. So your bond portfolio was 400,000. You had it very conservatively if you followed the Polaris plan, and you were making 1.2% or about $4,800 a year in dividends. Now, $4,800 is not going to make the $50,000 or the 5% that you might be taking out of your portfolio, which is $50,000. So you would have to sell, hopefully, an appreciated asset. If the stock market is up, like it was a year ago, in calendar year 21, the market, I think, returned 28%. So you could have easily sold from your biggest of winners a little bit of money because you made a ton of money, and you have the 4,800 from stock dividends. You might have another, let me actually just go over here. You might have another 12 to 15,000 from stock dividends, and then you sell something to make up the rest, and you'd still be way ahead because the 5% you're taking out is way less than what you made. Now we are in a different world. 12 months later, we are in a place where the bond portfolio, at least the bond portfolio that I recommend, went down approximately 10%. So your 400,000 in bonds became 360,000 in bonds. And you might think, oh my goodness, do I need to refill my cushion? Ironically, no. And here's the trick. A year ago, 400,000, 1.2%, $4,800. Today, your bond portfolio down 10% is $360,000, but your yield is 4%. So 4% times $360,000, you are now getting from bond dividends $14,400, an almost $10,000 increase. And the stock part, while the prices are down, the yield is up. And so the net effect from there is you're going to get about $12,000 to $13,000, a little bit less than last year, not a whole big difference, but you are covering much more of your annual needs with dividends. So we're talking 25 to 30,000 out of the 50. So if you had to go sell something, and let's say you decided to sell bonds, you might need $20,000 of bonds to sell. Well, you still have $360,000 of bonds to sell. The bonds that you have, while worth a lower total amount because of the higher yield, are now actually less needed. And you might think, wait, what? So I'm not rebalancing back to 40% bonds, if anyone ever had that number. Ironically, on the contrary, I might use this as an opportunity. And again, it's an idea. It's not necessarily right for you. I touched on this a little bit in a previous show or two. It might be a time to shrink your bond portfolio. Maybe not. Maybe not for you. And maybe this is too risky for you to wrap your head around. And if you're good where you are and you don't want to change, don't change. The purpose of money is making your life easier. If doing something slightly aggressive freaks you the fuck out and you can't sleep at night, then don't do it. What does it matter if you have a little bit more money if you're freaked out about it? So keep that in mind, that the goal of this is not for the purpose of having money. The goal of it is for the purpose of making your life better. And one of those ways is having more money. Having more money is, having more investments is a thing that helps you get to the actual goal, which is happiness and comfort. So we are now at a point where, because the bond yields, the actual dollars spit out, have gone from 4,800 to 14,400, an extra $10,000, the cushion doesn't need to be as large. It may also be very uncomfortable for you to sell bonds that are down 7, 8, 10, 12%. But if you move them over to some of the stock index funds, and I'm not suggesting any of these specifically for your portfolio, but the small cap growth fund is down 30%. The large cap growth fund is down 26%. International growth down 40%. There's lots of opportunities where you could rebalance, change your allocation, create a plan where you're selling stuff that is down 10 and buying things that are down 25, 30, 40%. Will that work out for you in the future? I don't know the future, but I do know if you're in retirement and your goal was to have the cushion sufficiently big enough that the stock dividends and the bond dividends and any bonds that you had to sell would get you to 12 to 14 to 15 years, you may now have too much money in bonds. Again, if you can pay all your bills and you have too much money in bonds, what a wonderful place to be. If your portfolio maybe is a little tighter than you wanted it to be, and you're going to retire in 5 years or 7 years, or you've already retired, this is a theoretical opportunity to not only rebalance, but maybe trim a teeny bit more out of the cushion. But you don't want to get to the point where you've hurt yourself and put yourself at risk. So don't get nutty. I'm not talking about going from a 60-40 portfolio to a 90-10 portfolio where it's 90% stocks and 10% bond. I'm always making small moves. Here is an opportunity to make a small move. And keep in mind, of course, just rebalancing in general. If the stocks are down, if the bonds are down 10 and stocks are down 20, you probably do an annual rebalance into stocks out of bonds anyway. But you might be able to do the math, consider what the effects are. It might be a possibility that you rebalance a little extra out of bonds and into stocks, because you are amazingly a little safer now in retirement because the bond yields have jumped so much. It is a warped reality because the bonds are not worth what they're worth until you have to sell them. The big important part of the bonds now in the cushion is yield. And the yield went from just over 1% to around 4%. Again, simplified it, it went from $5,000 to $15,000 a year. So you're getting an extra $10,000 in this theoretical sample of a $1 million portfolio. I hope that helped. At least it was something to think about. It's just one of those things that even in retirement, when everything is down, it's not necessarily that awful. And again, if you look at what stocks have done, US stocks have done in particular, this year so far in 2022, keep in mind you made 28% last year. Keep in mind that if you're following the portfolio, the Polaris plan, the Polaris ideas, we were overweighting value versus growth, and value has done a whole lot better than growth. So you haven't lost all the money that you might have lost if you were in all large cap growth stock funds. You had a broadly diversified portfolio, and you can see you have the clarity and you have the granularity. You can see exactly what you've got, what it's done. You can compare and contrast, and you can take a few items that did less awful. That's where we are this year. Everything, literally everything that I use, except for cash. Cash was awesome. Making 0.5% or 1% was way better than losing 10. But take a look. You don't have to rebalance often. For most people, once a year is fine. If you've got more than $1 million, definitely more than $2 million, well, twice a year, once a quarter is not going to kill me, especially if you're adding or removing money. You can do it as part of that process. So just keep that in mind. It's not that awful. The numbers are down. Your portfolio is definitely smaller. Your bonds are smaller, but they might actually be, and they probably are, depending on what kind of bonds you have, more valuable to you than when they were worth more if you were to trade them. So hopefully that helps. We're going to take a little pause, do something not money, and get on with the rest of the show. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Investments should be based on your personal situation, and you, of course, should consult with your financial advisor or tax professional before taking any actions.
Says slavery has to be considered in context. What's more relative than that? There were people at the time, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, there were innumerable humanists and secularists who said slavery is evil. The church wouldn't agree. Now, which is it then? Is it that the church is wrong, or, even more suggestive, that God has not yet revealed that it's wrong to them? Or did God support it all those years and then change his mind? From a beginning point of absurdity, you arrive at a terminal point of absolute moral chaos. And I think you've at least done us the favor of making that plain this evening. God, in short, God did not make man in his own image. It is precisely to the contrary. Mammals and primates made many gods and many churches in their own rival images.
Welcome back, everybody. And with me now, I have Representative Jared Huffman, or should I say Congressman? What's the proper protocol there?
Or even just Jared.
Jared.
You know, I answer to all of these things, and it's great to be back on your show.
Thank you. And for the listeners, I'll get the show number later, but you were on the show about 2 years ago, and we talked about something I do want to touch base. It'll be very important to my listeners. You are one of the founding members of the Congressional Freethought Caucus. Can you give us an update on that, and how's it going?
Well, it's going very well. Thanks for asking. Congressman Jamie Raskin and I founded this caucus about 3-4 years ago, and we're now up to, I believe, 16 members of the House. We're hoping to find a senator or two that will join us as well, but that is better than I ever thought we would do for a caucus that's focused on defending the secular nature of our republic, and defending the separation of church and state, and also defending atheists and agnostics and humanists who are discriminated against here in the United States and around the world.
Absolutely. And I had the little notes here from your webpage to bring up to define the Freethought Caucus, but you already did that, so I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm glad that you're there. It has a list of all the Congress members, the caucus members, so I am delighted to hear about that. One of the topics that just came up recently, and I know that this is something that you have, I think, co-sponsored, and forgive me if I use the wrong lingo here, a bill that has to do with creating clarity, visibility, transparency, I think is the best word, on private shared religious healthcare plans. What are they, and then what does the bill do?
Yeah, and you got the terminology right. Co-sponsors is the way we do it. I'm the lead author of this legislation, and it's focusing on these shady kind of quasi-religious outfits that kind of pose as health insurance products. You're starting to hear them advertised all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't even watch CNN, especially if I'm listening on Sirius XM radio, without hearing constant ads for this thing that I guess is 1-800-BIBLE, and it bills itself as better than regular health insurance, happier customers, less bureaucracy. It's basically a scam posing as a ministry for religious folks to pay each other's medical bills so that they don't have to have actual health insurance. But a lot of people get left in the lurch. A lot of people are deceived. And this legislation you asked me about, which is the Health Share Transparency Act, is all about bringing some transparency and accountability to this growing concern.
Absolutely. And just for clarity, I think I have it here because I'm looking on the internet. H.R. 8324, in case anyone wants to look it up, Health Share Transparency Act of 2022. And so the basic gist, I think, of these programs is someone with either good intent or malintent creates an organization, registers it as a ministry, and goes out and starts collecting money from people, maybe $500 a month or $200 a month. And the idea is that this is theoretically, a legitimate replacement for conventional healthcare services or healthcare insurance, I guess. Is that right?
If everyone was honorable and in it for those
lofty goals,
lofty reasons, that's how it would work. And it wouldn't be a scam and a Ponzi scheme. But the unfortunate facts are that people are getting scammed and ripped off all over the country right now.
And so I get that they can set this up, and you hear the ads and you call them up and you say, hey, this is great because I'm protected not only by this health insurance, but by God, because you're godly people collecting my money. All of that sounds okay and straightforward. I'm giving my money over. And then I get sick and I have my tonsils removed or something horrifically worse than that. And I go to collect the money to pay my hospital bills. What happens then?
Well, all too often, people find out that this is not actual health insurance, that there's all sorts of trap doors that these so-called ministries can use to deny you coverage. Some of them just go out of business. You know, it is just a good old-fashioned Ponzi scheme, and they collect as much money as they can, and then when the claims on that money get too high, they move on.
They just walk.
Yeah, it is crying out for government oversight and I believe regulation. And here's the thing, Phil, the only reason we have these health share ministries is because of a loophole in the Affordable Care Act that was meant to leave space for legitimate health sharing operations in religious communities like the Amish community to kind of do their own thing to cover their health costs without having to be part of a government program. And a lot of unscrupulous folks have figured out that they can make a lot of money on this. And so some very big businesses, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars. So these outfits have sprung up and they are proliferating.
Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, just popped into my head. Well, do you know about these programs that I see advertised all the time where I can avoid paying part of my Medicare, Medicaid bill, and I pay a private insurance company and they give them more benefits, and I got a call to check my zip code? Are you up to speed on what those are?
Yeah, well, it's a different subject, these Medicare Advantage plans. And, you know, I probably am not the best person to advise on whether that makes sense or raises similar concerns. But from my understanding, there are good ones and there are bad ones. And I think people should just exercise a lot of diligence in that space.
Fair enough. Is there any health share transparency organization or health share organizations outside of the Amish that you're aware of that are legitimate? Does it happen? It could happen?
I'm not able to say for sure, but I am sure that, I would assume some of these folks are operating honorably. One would hope so. Unfortunately, we have all too many examples of those who are not. There was an outfit that left a Houston couple, a group called Alera Healthcare, left a Houston couple with over $100,000 in medical debt after they refused to cover very basic healthcare services.
And they're a healthcare company because it's in the title.
Yeah, it's right there. I mean, and yet they don't have to, file reports with the government. They don't have to do all the things that an actual healthcare entity would need to do. Anyway, they've now been sued by multiple attorneys general in various states and have shut down But this poor Houston couple, unfortunately, was hit with $100,000 in medical debt.
Oh my!
Because they were ripped off. And I could give you a number of other examples. There's a company called Liberty Health Share in Ohio that left patients with a bunch of uncovered medical bills for really simple stuff, including flu vaccinations. And the patients end up with all of these bills in collections.
So they have no problem collecting, apparently, the fees from the end users. They collect those, and those monies get put in a big pile, and they're supposed to be sent out to cover medical bills, but the money disappears. They file bankruptcy, the founders disappear, and the bill, I'm assuming, would either make them comply with regulations, or at least they'd have to report their numbers. How does that work out?
Yeah, so the bill does several I would argue, very basic things. And what's really meant to do is get this basic information out there for both consumers and for government regulators. The first thing is it requires them to make certain disclosures to folks who are considering purchasing their product. They've got to tell them that they are not actual insurance. They've got to explain that very clearly. They've got to make it clear that they do not cover the same essential benefits that the Affordable Care Act requires, for example, because most of them do not.
Yeah.
They've got to explain whether or not, if you have a grievance about their coverage, you can appeal that. What happens when your claim is denied. They need to list things very specifically that are banned from reimbursement. And a lot of times, this is all in the fine print. If their executives determine that you've engaged in an ungodly lifestyle or something like that, they can just deny your claim, and they do it all the time. So all of this has to be known upfront by consumers so they know what they're getting themselves into. And then we also require some really important disclosures to the government, to HHS and to the FTC. And that includes financial information about corporate boards, how much of their money they actually spend on healthcare. In the insurance space, we call this the medical loss ratio, which is kind of a cynical word for it. It's actually money that you spend on healthcare. But it's required of actual health insurance, and also percentage of claims that are denied. All this has to be disclosed. And then finally, this is one of my favorites, complaints received by the FTC on these health share ministries have to be posted publicly so that people can go online and see them. So this is about transparency and accountability.
Yeah, and so you're not about crushing someone's religious liberties or allowing them to have group-sponsored health care coverage. You're talking about transparency.
Well, look, if they believe this is the way they need to practice their religion, I personally find that to be a bit of a stretch. But if they absolutely believe they got to do it this way because of their religion, let's at least make sure they're not ripped off.
Yeah. So it's consumer advocacy, consumer protection kind of bill.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, I know I've looked at your website here. You've got this little California logo. So, and just in case I have listeners in your district, they need to know who they are. So what is your district, and what's with that fish in the logo?
Well, the fish is kind of a wonderful symbol for my coastal district. It starts at the Golden Gate Bridge and goes all the way to the Oregon border. I've got a third of the California coast, this beautiful swath of coastline and redwoods and wine country. If you're into cannabis, we got a lot of that too. I'm told that the Emerald Triangle, Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity County is like the prime appellation for cannabis in the country. So we got a little of everything.
Excellent. And what's the number of that district, just in case?
California's 2nd Congressional District.
2nd Congressional District. And before I look at some of these other bills that I've got some ideas, what are things that are on top of mind for you? What are you working on today?
Oh, just a few little things like saving our democracy, trying to make sure we have a livable planet for future generations, fighting back against this incredible divisiveness and fact-free vitriol that substitutes for political engagement by a lot of Republicans these days. Yeah, a few things like that.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to go to that, but since you have, I'm guessing you're not the biggest fan of Mr. Trump.
He is. No, there are no words.
Yeah, well, I've got some, but we'll save that for another podcast. But so what is going on with January 6th? Do you have any insight into that beyond what we see on TV?
Well, some, and thankfully you have begun to see some of this on TV because of the incredible work of the Select Committee on the insurrection and the hearings that they've held, which have been incredibly revelatory and probative. But the thing I think for your listeners that is most important is the central role that white Christian nationalism played in this insurrection. It was the beating heart of the insurrection. It was the connective tissue that brought all of these disparate groups together in a violent attempt to prevent the transfer of power.
And what is their agenda? Why would they want to prevent the transfer of power? What do they get, or what do they dream or fantasize that they're going to get?
Well, they wanted to get 4 more years of Donald Trump, even though he hadn't won the election. And the reason they wanted that is because he is all in for their agenda. It's an agenda that is absolutely about breaking down that barrier between church and state. It's agenda about banning, criminalizing abortion, rolling back LGBTQ equality and other civil rights, suppressing votes, basically breaking down the public school system so that we simply give vouchers for folks to go to religious schools. That is, one of their fondest wishes and dreams. And they say it. This is not just me. It's right there in their agenda, and a lot more. So it is basically a theocracy. It is a religious dystopia that they hope to achieve. And, it's not everyone in the MAGA coalition that is like that, but this white Christian nationalist ideology is absolutely holding a lot of this coalition together.
Well, the things that you just rattled off the top of your head, I'm assuming you don't have a precise list in front of you, is a fantasy list of things that we could talk about. What portion of the country do you think you could run for office and say the things that you're saying out loud if you weren't in Northern California?
That's a good question. Look, I'm a little more candid and outspoken on these things than many of my colleagues, but it is not because I, disrespect or am hostile towards religion or people of faith. I have great respect for that, but I don't like the idea of these white Christian nationalists trying to impose their, I would say, very distorted brand of Christianity onto the rest of the country as a national religion and as a public policy agenda. That just crosses too many lines, and it's dangerous and it's violent.
Yeah.
So I feel compelled to call this out and do everything I can to oppose it.
Absolutely. I'm thinking now about the courts, the Supreme Court, and specifically, I want to start with and then just get up to contemporary thoughts on the Supreme Court. But previously, the courts have ruled somebody like Hobby Lobby, a corporation can have a religion. What do you think about that?
Well, it's preposterous, of course, but that was the even less radical Supreme Court that came up with the Hobby Lobby decision. It's gotten a lot worse.
Yeah.
And this current radical Supreme Court majority had a terrible term last term, and they're just getting warmed up. They're taking even more cases. And so the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment is essentially being read out of the Constitution. If you uphold the Establishment Clause, this court believes that you are infringing on the free exercise of religion. So they're taking us to a really dark and I think dangerous place with this twisted notion of religious liberty. And you're going to see a lot more. I mean, it's not just, cake decorators. You're going to see all kinds of cases that they seek out, essentially, and take review of so that they can knock down true protections against theocracy.
Well, one of the protections, one of the rights that we've had up until now was, I don't know if it's codified, but made real by the Supreme Court. Roe versus Wade is what I'm thinking of. And it's a fascinating thing because one of the arguments I hear is it's a states' rights issue, which I've never liked, ever. And of course, it's a states' rights issue, so the states can decide. And now, the day after the states can decide, now they're talking about they want to codify it and make it an actual law so the states can't decide. Talk about Roe versus Wade, and I'd love your thoughts in general, if you have any, on states' rights as a philosophy.
Well, states' rights is always sort of invoked very selectively by our Republican friends. They raise it. They used to talk about it a lot when they wanted the federal government to be smaller and less intrusive. But now they have these expansive religion-based social agendas and culture wars that they want to wage. And so they don't like the idea of some states, protecting LGBTQ equality, or some states allowing access to safe abortions. So, Lindsey Graham, no sooner had they dusted off their talking points after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision and tried to claim this was now about states' rights, and Lindsey Graham proposes a new law that would criminalize abortion federally. So they're all over the map, and they're basically wherever they need to be on any given issue to advance their agenda.
It also seems to me that normally I'm not a big fan of a slippery slope argument. But here I think it's totally warranted because they're not hiding anymore. They're flat out saying what is next. The Hobby Lobby case dealt with a little bit of things that would prevent pregnancy being called, I'm not sure I got the right word, abortifacients. And is there risk that we could lose birth control and same-sex marriage and inter-race marriage? Are these things that they might go for?
Yeah, and it's not just me or you trying to scare people. Just read Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision. He went out of his way to write a concurrence that said, next up is some of those things you just mentioned, because a lot of them depend on the same privacy right framework and foundation that the Roe decision was all about. So now that they've knocked that out, Clarence Thomas is ready to go after contraception and all the things that follow from there.
Yeah, and this is a guy who can't really ask any questions of pro or con or defendants or anything in the Supreme Court. He has no words, but he sure can write a lot about a lot of stuff he wants to take away. I know your time is precious, and thank you so very much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. Are there any topics that you want to cover before we go away, including where people can send money? What is your website? What are you doing next? When's the book come out? Whatever.
That's nice. I appreciate it, Bill. So, look, if they want to support my work, my website is jaredhuffman.com. You can find out a little more about me, and I welcome that. But I hope folks for the next 23 days are focused on doing everything we can to try to win this midterm election, because there's a lot hanging in the balance right now. So support the groups that are out there mobilizing turnout, including Planned Parenthood and NARAL pro-choice that are just doing amazing things. Support the groups that are ready to defend the integrity of our elections and go to court when necessary to challenge this scourge of voter suppression and all of the racism and theocratic agenda that lies behind it. That would be great, and I appreciate the chance to plug that. Not a problem. And once again, everybody, this is just Jared Huffman, United States Representative, California 2nd District. I thank you so much for taking some time to come join us and give us some updates from Washington, D.C. Thanks, Phil. Take care.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you so much for listening to the show today. I greatly appreciate it. If you like this show, you can go leave a 5-star review in a couple of different places. I'd appreciate that. Or you can tell a friend, share the link on Facebook, Twitter, or one of them other bazillion different platforms that I know almost nothing about, and I think I'm okay with that. Did you hear about Kanye? He's going to buy Parler? I guess, whatever. Crazy world we live in. Other things that are going on, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm going to some conferences, so I'm not going to belabor that. Things are starting to calm down a little bit with the move in the second house and Polaris going to SEC status instead of registered in the state of Illinois. And because things have calmed down a little, my current minimum for new clients has temporarily been reduced from 5 million to 2 million. I know that's not very many people, and I wish you had $2 million. But if you do have $2 million and you're interested in talking to me about how Polaris works, or if you've just got questions, you can email me at any time, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Of course, if you've got suggestions on what we should have on the show, guests to interview, new books that are coming out, if you have a line on someone who's famous that you think would be on the show, share that with me. That'd be really helpful. Make my life a little bit easier. But like I said, I'm kind of busy, so I'm going to wrap it up, getting ready to hop on the plane to go to Las Vegas, and you'll hear this while I'm in Las Vegas. And I do hope to see you out there on the road sometime soon. Until then, ciao.
Well, I was born too late to play in the Rolling Stones. I don't know Jimmy Page, I never met Yoko Ono. Standing with a Strat, I'm rock and roll's bastard son. Go out, get drunk, get laid, have fun. Don't got $1 million, don't drive a Cadillac. Give me half a chance, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. I've been machine gun, handgun, hijack, left for dead. Dive bomb, napalm, nuclear warheaded. Dropped from a jet plane with no parachute. Shot by a firing squad and raped by a business suit. Dancing on a landmine, one leg left. I can still crawl and I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, you're bigger, rougher, meaner, tougher.